Jack Unterweger.
Oh boy, what a great last name that is.
Or as his mother named him, Johann Unterweger.
Oh, that's even better. Johann!
Yeah. Johann. Danke. Danke, Mutter. He was born August 16th, 1950 in Styria, Austria.
Oh.
His mom was a teenager when she had him, and he never knew his dad. According to him, this is another sort of nature versus nurture sort of thing. These all kind of are.
That's the big debate with serial killers.
Whose fault is it? According to him, his mom was also a prostitute, though this is not really a man whose word can be trusted.
No.
His mom went to jail for stealing when he was very young, so he was sent to live with his grandpa and step-grandma. Eventually, his mom got out of prison and married an American soldier that Jack believed to be his dad, but she never came back for him, so little Jackie was left to be raised by his alcoholic and abusive grandpa who had a love for prostitutes, but again, don't always believe what this man claims. His childhood was not normal, and this we know for sure. He got arrested at age 16 for assaulting a prostitute. This was one of 15 or 16 times during his teenage years that he was arrested. He was also accused of rape, abducting a minor, and assault with a steel rod.
Oh boy, I hate steel rods.
No.
My least favorite type of rod.
My favorite rod is sterling. Sterling.
Got it? Up together?
Who are we talking about?
How did I get ice melt toast?
Rod Stewart. He even tried to pimp out his own girlfriends.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The most surprising part about what happened next is that it didn't happen sooner. He was 24 in December 1974 in Germany with his girlfriend when they were driving around one night and saw a friend of his girlfriend, Margaret Schaefer, walking down the street alone. He pulled over and picked her up and proceeded to drive into the woods with both girls. He forced himself sexually on Schaefer, and when she resisted, he strangled her and then beat her to death.
Okay. Well, that's awful.
The thing is, his girlfriend was there watching the whole thing. Shortly after, his girlfriend told the police everything, and he was taken to court. He told the judge that after he strangled Schaefer, quote, "I envisioned my mother in front of me and I killed her." There was another murder from 3 years prior to this that many suspect he also committed, but this was never proven. So Jack Unterweger was undeniably and admittedly guilty and was sentenced to life in prison in 1976. Threat neutralized. End of story. How could the story continue? Welcome to Austria, where the story never ends.
I want to go to Austria.
Vienna waits for you, Greg. He tried to kill himself 3 times in prison, but then
Try harder.
then he got another idea. There were 2 things that Jack Unterweger was great at. I'll get to the second one later, but the first was that he was great at manipulating people. He could see what somebody wanted or needed and pull himself into that role in order to gain control over this person, no matter what that role was. He was described as part Hannibal Lecter, part Ted Bundy, part Mick Jagger.
Mick Jagger is the one I have the most problems with.
I could tolerate a Bundy. Whether he thought this through or not, what happened to him happened. Austria in the 70s was still recovering from World War II, and the role they played in it, which was not a very flattering one.
It's not remembered. Great.
No, it's not looked upon fondly. It was a country craving redemption, and what better way to prove that redemption is possible by demonstrating it himself. So the country needed an aspirational figure to strive for, and he was just the man to fill that role.
How is that possible?
There was an ultra-liberalism that was prominent in Vienna at the time, which tended to give artists every benefit of every doubt as a sort of reaction to how things were in World War II, where all artists were trash and scum according to the Nazis. So why not become an artist? That's why I got into it.
Is that how...
I'm an artist. He kept very detailed diaries, so why not go with that? He started writing in his jail cell, and apparently he was very good at it. He wrote poems. He wrote plays. He even wrote children's stories that were performed on the radio. He wrote 2 books, Terminus Prison, which won awards, but his big one was Purgatory in 1983. This was his memoir that exposed his raw, beating heart to all of Austria, and they liked what was beaten. The book was a bestseller, and he was even taught to children in schools. Not the first Austrian to write a bestseller from prison.
What was the other one?
Hitler. It was his Mein Kampf. They even made a movie of the book in 1989 that he himself co-wrote. He even posed for a movie poster with a noose around his neck. You'll find out later why that's funny. It was so well written that the country's intellectual elite decided that no murderer could create such beautiful art. And Unterweger saw this and basically reinforced to all of them that, yeah, you're right, I'm cured. Art had cured him. I'm an artist.
That's so scary.
They all started to lobby hard for his release, claiming that he was a changed man. He was a triumph of the the concept of rehabilitation, according to them.
Except.
Nobel Prize-winning authors were praising him. High-ranking officials and esteemed psychiatrists in Vienna were on his side. Petitions were signed to get him free, and on May 23rd, 1990, he was paroled. He got his life sentence knocked down to 14 years for being a model prisoner.
And that's why the jail system doesn't work.
We meant a dog's life sentence. When he got out of prison, he was already a national celebrity. The people of Austria loved his book, and most of all, they loved him. He was on magazine covers. He was on talk shows. He was doing live readings from his book. His play, Scream of Fear... It got a state grant to be staged and toured around.
Yeah, I want to go on the tour.
I have a shirt from that tour.
I survived it.
He became a reporter for the Austrian ORF, which is their equivalent to the BBC. He got a BMW with a license plate that said W Jack 1. He's the Jack from Jack FM.
Jack Reacher.
He'd go around wearing white suits with hibiscuses in the lapel, gold chains around his wrists, and a white hat, a Navajo vest, and white snakeskin boots.
Bloodstains on white stuff is just so alluring if you're a psychopath.
Just dweebs. These people are dweebs.
Yeah.
If you don't see him dressed like Midnight Cowboy, you could find him posing shirtless, showing off his prison tattoos.
Oh, cool.
Women, again, were drawn to him. He would apparently be in dozens of relationships at once. Little did all of Austria know, most everything in this supposed memoir of his was made up. He had built up his own mythology, and it didn't take long for him to pick up right where he had left off before prison. The September after he was released, Unterweger was in Prague in his BMW for a reading of passages from his book. While he was there, a prostitute named Blanka Bokova disappeared. Next month, Unterweger was in Bratz, Austria, when a well-known prostitute named Brumhilde Masser went missing too. It's a weird coincidence.
Strange.
Yeah. All right. Case closed.
Yeah, well, this stuff happens, yeah?
It happens. Yeah.
People go missing.
Eastern Europe. Come on. Then in November, both these women's bodies were found in the woods on the outskirts of their respective towns. Their bodies were found lightly covered with leaves and twigs. Both were posed in sexually suggestive poses on their back or stomachs with their legs spread open. Both had signs of being beaten, and both were found with their stockings or bras tied around their necks. It took a third prostitute, Heidi Hammerer, to go missing in December in Bregenz, Austria, for the police to put together that they have a serial killer on their hands. Prostitution was legal in Austria, so this sort of thing didn't normally happen. Like, there was no reason for this to happen. Then the parents of this third victim started getting phone calls on their unlisted number from a man taunting them about having a prostitute for a daughter. Her body turned up on the outskirts of town 7 months later, mostly decomposed, but killed and posed in a similar fashion as the other two. Then, spring of 1991, the flurry broke out when prostitutes named Elfried Schrempf, Sylvia Zagler, Sabine Moitzi, Regina Prem, and Karen Sladke Eroglu all turned up dead in the outskirts of Graz and Vienna. The common thread that nobody put together or wanted to put together was that Unterweger was in each of these places when these women disappeared.
No, he's rehabilitated.
He's a changed man. He's an author. The pen is mightier than his throttling hands. In case you didn't put it together, Unterweger was the killer. He would go to one of these places for work, pick up a prostitute, drive them to the outskirts of town or to an empty parking lot, tie them up as part of their normal business, and then when they were tied up, his mood would shift, and he'd force them out of the car and march them into the woods naked. If they resisted, he would kick and beat them, then he would strangle them to death with their own bras or stockings and pose and bury their bodies. Then, in a touch of insane audacity, when the story broke that there was a prostitute serial killer on the loose, he, being a reporter, set himself up as the main correspondent on the story. He went around interviewing prostitutes, police chiefs, everybody on national TV, and he was everywhere on national TV covering the crimes that he himself was committing.
Was Austria so blind from the embarrassment of Nazism that they're like, but we're not any authority figure at all?
Who are we?
We can do this.
And then the Cecil called and told him that his room was ready. Unterweger accepted a few...
Don't come!
He accepted a few jobs from a few magazines in Austria to write articles on crime and prostitution.
What does he know about?
In LA. So he flew over, and on June 11th, 1991, Jack Unterweger checked into the Cecil Hotel. Why the Cecil? Some think he did it out of homage to Richard Ramirez, but there isn't much evidence to support that. More likely he did it out of homage to Charles Bukowski's love of gross hates LA because he kept a copy of one of Bukowski's books on the windowsill the whole time during his stay.
You know who didn't love that was probably Charles Bukowski.
No, he liked it. Even more likely, he was there because the Cecil spares nobody, and it was only $25 a night.
That's easy peasy.
What we know for sure is that the killings in Austria miraculously stopped during the 5 weeks that
That's strange.
he was in LA.
Let's put the Hardy Boys on it.
They were killed in the Holocaust. But he was very productive in LA. He wrote articles. He wrote some short stories, young prostitutes in Hollywood. He went to a festival in Echo Park. He went to Hollywood Park trying to find Bukowski. He ate at Hugo's in Santa Monica. He spent a lot of time in Silver Lake. He went to the Gay Pride Parade, which he hated. He started dating a receptionist from the Cecil named Carolina. He hung out at the Parker Center LAPD headquarters to learn as much as he could about the seedy underbelly of the city. He even went on a ride-along where they showed him exactly where to find prostitutes. 7th Street.
Where do people usually dump bodies at?
Just wondering for a friend. Rick. So all the prostitutes turned out were right near his hotel. He would pay them $30 and make them climb up the fire escape to get to his room. Then he began his work. Sharon Exley's body was found June 20th, 1991 on the shoulder of the 60 freeway in Boyle Heights, strangled with her own bra. He had killed her at 7th and Fickett in Boyle Heights, which is now an elementary school. Irene Rodriguez was found June 30th in a truck loading area at 1st and Myers in Boyle Heights, right by the river, strangled with her own bra. Sherry Long, aka Peggy Jean Booth, was found July 10th near Coral Canyon Road in Malibu, strangled with her own bra. All were prostitutes. The first two worked near the Cecil. The last one worked Hollywood, which adds up because Unterweger checked out of the Cecil on July 2nd and stayed in Hollywood for a while before he left LA for good on July 16th. The police had no idea who was doing this. All they knew was that whoever did it had scoped out the locations to dump the bodies beforehand. Back in Austria, a retired cop saw what had been done to local women, and it sparked a memory of what Unterweger had done in the 70s. It seems that the police already kind of suspected him, but they didn't want to acknowledge that, so they wouldn't look bad for having let him back out of prison in the first place. They also knew how adored he was by the public and didn't want to risk their ire by going after him, so they secretly started keeping an eye on all of his actions, financial and otherwise. After a few months, Unterweger got tipped off from a friend that he was a suspect in the murders. In response, since he was still covering the case, he started criticizing the police for not having caught the killer yet and started to turn the public against the police rather than him. By this time, he was living with his 18-year-old fiancée, Bianca Mrock.
Their eyes open.
Mrock said he was a control freak and got her an interview to become a prostitute so that he could live off of her money, which is, he often lived off the money of the women he knew. But she still loved him, and she convinced him that they should leave Vienna since he was a suspect. They went to Switzerland, where he made Mrock take a job as a bartender. Then Mrock's parents reported her as missing, and hearing who her fiance was, they wanted to find her before he killed her, which according to some journals they found, that's what was going to happen. The police raided Unterweger's apartment in Vienna, but inside they did find pictures of him with female members of the LAPD, a menu from a restaurant in Malibu, and receipts from the Cecil Hotel.
Great.
This got the Vienna police wondering what he was doing in LA, so they contacted the LAPD, who confirmed that there were 3 unsolved murders during his time there, and upon reviewing the evidence, the bras used to kill the women in LA matched exactly the knots used in the bras to kill the women in Europe. Then, a strand of hair found in Unterweger's abandoned BMW was found that matched the DNA of the hair of his first victim in Prague. Then they matched some strands of clothing found on some of the bodies to one of the scarves in Unterweger's closet. So the hunt was officially on.
Good.
The Unterweger. But he was already on the move. From Switzerland, they had driven to Paris and then flown to New York and then finally to Miami. All along the way, he was writing and calling into news outlets in Austria, insisting he was innocent and that the police were framing him.
I'm gonna keep moving though.
Don't worry about me.
I'm fine.
He insisted that he loved his freedom too much to risk it all by killing again, and that he would rather kill himself than go back to prison.
Good.
In Miami, he made his fiancée get a job as a stripper while he kept defending himself to the Austrian media and rally the intellectuals on his side again. Eventually, his credit cards were traced to Miami. And when he went to the local Western Union to collect some money sent to him by an ex-girlfriend, the police surrounded him and he was under arrest. Initially, he was like, oh, let me get tried in LA because there were only 3 victims there. Then he realized California had the death penalty. So on May 28th, he was like, all right, let's go to Austria. He went back to Austria. He was accused of 11 counts of murder in 3 countries. It was called the trial of the century in Austria, I guess, except for the Nazis. He
Start it over.
This is a whole new century. For Austria. For the Reich.
Why should he say that?
Reich power. He insisted the entire time that he was innocent. 20 women sat crying in the courtroom for him during the trial.
Oh.
It actually came to light that he had relations with over 150 women and even had in his address book the names of 40 women with their sexual performance rated.
But who's going to rate your performance, Unferger?
God. He even had 2 serious girlfriends at once who he was living with simultaneously.
How do you do that?
I'm going to work.
Let me change my coat.
Before his sentencing, he repeatedly told his lawyer that he would kill himself if he was found guilty and wrote in several letters to friends that suicide was the final freedom.
Fine, whatever.
People thought he was just trying to get attention. The night before the sentencing, a bomb exploded outside the courthouse in some sort of attempt to disrupt the proceedings. He was found guilty on 9 counts of murder, not for the other 2, because in those cases, all that was left of the victims were bones when they found him, so they couldn't prove those. That night, June 29th, 1994, in Graz, Jack Unterweger demonstrated yet again the second skill that he was great at that I mentioned before, and hanged himself in the jail cell. He was great at tying knots. He hung himself off a curtain rod using a piece of wire and the drawstring from his jogging pants, presumably because a bra wasn't handy. In one final piece of evidence, the knot he used in his noose matched exactly the same as all the others. He was found dead at 3:40 a.m. and he died before his appeal, so technically his guilty verdict was not legally binding. This story was eventually made into an opera by John Malkovich, and earlier this year was even an Austrian movie called Jack. Many in Austria still think he was framed as some sort of class warfare police conspiracy. Even though he is considered to be the first global serial killer, the story isn't that well known in LA because while all this was happening, the city was distracted by the officers on trial for the Rodney King beating, and then OJ happened, so this kind of got like glanced over. But at least Unterweger can be proud that he was convicted of 2 separate life sentences. So good for him. That is Jack Unterweger.
What a dirtbag.